What are taxes for? No one likes them. You, me, the Indian street cleaner, Jeff Bezos. We all agree, taxes suck, bruh. But taxes are not good or bad. Taxes are just a tool. We decide what taxes are fair based on how we should use our resources as a society. Taxes, I think, should have two goals. The first one is to fund what everyone likes: national security, your security, schools, hospitals, the legal system. The second goal is to reduce inequality. This gives your kids a chance to do well in life. For example, taxes help make housing more affordable for your kids. When most wealth is concentrated in the hands of the few, only the wealthiest have enough cash to buy assets, especially real estate. And at the same time, they can influence policy to throttle house building. Taxes also prevent the rich from getting so rich that they can take over the media and the government and push for policies that mostly help them. So why do we need a wealth tax specifically? We need it to reduce inequality. Inequality now is rampant. It's approaching levels from the early 20th century when poor folks were still dying by the hundreds of thousands in slums of tuberculosis and cholera and other nasty diseases. Now, history teaches us that there's only two ways to reduce inequality. One is the destruction of wealth, such as what happened in World War I and World War II, or taxing the richest. Now, obviously, we don't want another world war, and so taxing the richest seems to be the way to go. The taxes we've already got are not enough. Now let's have a look at the case of Rupert Alexander Cavendish, 23rd Baron Chesbury. Now, Rupert owns about £20 million in government bonds and index funds, give or take, inherited from his father, the 22nd Baron Chesbury. Now, Rupert makes about £1 million in passive income per year and pays about 24% of that to the taxman as capital gains tax in the worst case scenario. With some creative financial arrangements, the effective rate is probably closer to about 10%. Now, Rupert doesn't have to work. He spends his life shooting clay pigeons and sailing around the Caribbean on his yacht. Meanwhile, doctors around the country grind out 12-hour shifts, including nights and weekends, while earning about 5% of Rupert's earnings and paying the same rate of tax, about 24%. Now, you might say that people like Rupert should pay their fair share, and you'd be absolutely right. But Rupert is a clever fellow. He was a regular at the Union while studying PPE at Oxford. He knows exactly how to debate those pesky plebs under the table and will try to convince you taxing him is a bad idea. Now let's have a look at his bag of tricks. Now, the supposed reasons why wealth taxes are so bad break down into three categories. The first, wealth taxes are unfair. Second category, wealth taxes are bad for everybody. Third category, it's just too hard to implement wealth taxes, so let's just give up. I've collected all these arguments and reviewed them, so get a hot drink, strap in, because we've got quite a journey ahead of us. Claim number 1. Wealth taxes are theft. I earned my wealth by the sweat of my brow, and no one has the right to take it from me. Now, everybody can understand this argument, but it conveniently ignores the fact that about half the billionaire wealth in the world is inherited. So I suppose all of these heirs worked very hard to be born into the right family. But even assuming that you earned your wealth yourself, that you are a self-made man or woman, let me ask you this. How many other bootstrapping multimillionaires do you know that come from the jungles of Papua New Guinea or Chiriri, Central Sahara? You likely made your millions in the relative safety and comfort of the West. You didn't have to eat mud, you didn't have to hide from armed militias, and you got quality education and some form of healthcare and the protection of the legal system to boot. So why not give back to society so that others can make it just like you did? Now, there's another deeper counter-argument here about the sanctity of private property, but that is for another video. Claim 2. But double taxation? Taxing income twice is apparently so contentious that it doesn't let some people sleep at night. But if we think about this a bit more carefully, this is something that we are already exposed to every day. Different taxes already overlap to some degree. Just to give you an example, let's have a look at the UK council tax. This is a tax that you pay to your local council to maintain roads, streetlights, and other infrastructure. Now, you typically pay it with the money that you've got in your bank, which had already been taxed because it came from your salary. The same would be true of the wealth tax. So let's look at the plight of Elon Tusk. Now, Elon got about $28,000 as seed capital from his dad, who had already paid corporate and capital gains taxes on that money. Elon now uses this cash to start an internet company called Chip2. Chip2 is a massive success, and Elon sells it for about $300 million. But now Elon has to pay capital gains tax again? And it's 20%? What's even left after the taxman has taken his share? Elon wonders. And now you're asking poor Elon to pay a wealth tax on top? You filthy communist pig. There's just no justice in this world for the hard-working entrepreneur like Elon. Now, setting aside the fact that half of the UK would already be rioting daily on the streets if they followed Elon's logic, brace yourself for what I'm about to say. There's nothing inherently unjust about double taxation. We already do it. Taxes are just a tool. If we want to reduce wealth concentration, there's no way around it but taxing wealth. Claim 3. Wealth taxes are bad for the economy. Why start new companies when the sticky fingers of the taxman will just take it all away in the end? Also, it supposedly throttles growth, lowers wages, and gives your mum cancer. Now, these visions of Armageddon are especially beloved by the trickle-down crowd. The Tax Foundation, for example, a Washington, D.C. think tank set up in 1937 by US oil and automotive tycoons, predicts that some form of wealth taxes, recently proposed by economists such as Thomas Piketty, will shrink the GDP, tank the wages, and cut jobs by the millions in the US alone. Now that seems pretty scary, but you might wonder how they got to these numbers, to 4 significant figures no less. I had a look at the Tax Foundation's financial models to learn how the sausage is made. And oh boy, are the sausage makers creative. Now, I'm not an economist, but I did spend about 10 years of my life modeling things. And if there's one thing I learned, is that assumptions are everything. Now, say you're modeling how much your mum might spend in retirement, depending on the size of her pension. What you do first is take a few assumptions. Your mum's gonna spend more the bigger her pension. Seems reasonable. Then you do some maths. Spending equals pension size times some fitting parameter. The next step is to get some data. For example, you ask your elderly neighbors how much they earn and how much they spend per month. Then you fit the mum spending model to the data to get the missing fitting parameter. Cool, that's job done, right? No, not if your assumption is wrong. Maybe your mum is a minimalist and would save most of the money even if she were absolutely loaded. In this case, your model is useless. Now back to modeling the economy. The problem is that the economy is a complicated machine. In it, you've got hundreds of millions of people with different attitudes, habits, behaviors, risk appetite. Modeling it all accurately is impossible. So economists use simplifying assumptions, and lots of them. Taking the PDF of the Tax Foundation's model, hitting Ctrl F and punching in assume gives 34 hits? Now, some of these look pretty creative. Oh, and what's this? 150 parameters? Some 20 equations in the model? The physicist Enrico Fermi said that with a model with 4 parameters he can fit an elephant, and with a 5th parameter he can make the elephant wiggle his trunk. This makes me wonder, what could you possibly do with a model with 150 parameters? Who knows what you could fit with it? Now, I'm not saying that Tax Foundation's predictions are necessarily wrong, but it's really easy to get exactly the predictions you want with such a big model by just massaging the parameters a little bit. All of this to say, take financial modeling predictions with a pinch of salt, especially when peddled by the trickle-down crowd. Okay, you say, so these guys may be wrong, but that doesn't make you right. True, but don't take my word for it. We can learn from history. In the period after World War II, taxes in the developed world were the highest ever, about 70% plus on income, 40% plus on corporations, 30% on capital gains. Now, while few countries actually had a wealth tax, these taxes were pretty harsh for high earners, such as entrepreneurs and executives, and for companies, in the form of the corporation tax, compared to now. Yet new industries proliferated: electronics, computing, aviation, rocketry. And economic growth was absolutely explosive. Claim 4. Wealth taxes reward mindless consumerism. Why save for retirement? The taxman will just take it away, so spend it all on a yacht instead. Now, these arguments often feel oddly emotional. Arguments where hard-working boomers tend to rail against loser millennials for blowing all their money on avocado toast and VR frames. But if we think for more than 2 seconds, this is obvious nonsense. We as a society decide what fortunes to tax. For example, we could decide not to tax fortunes below, say, $2 million. This would reward small savers and investors and allow everybody to retire comfortably. And the extra tax revenue from the wealth tax would allow for better pensions. Claim 5. Taxing wealth is unnecessary. Why would you tax wealth? We can just optimize the taxes that we've already got, for example, on income, on consumption, on inheritance. Now, I find it hard to see how this would work. Inheritance taxes might to some degree, although they still allow too many people to accumulate too much power in their lifetimes, case in point our mate Elon Tusk. But even if possible, this is all needlessly complicated. For example, you want to cook your childhood favorite dish, bean stew. You can definitely do it on an open fire in your garden and spend the whole day collecting hay, wood, then building a stake, then use a fire drill to light it, and then cook the beans slowly in the kettle over the fire, only to burn them in the end. Why go through all this trouble when you can just cook perfect beans every time in a pressure cooker in your kitchen in about 30 minutes? TLDR, the taxes do slow down the growing gap between the rich and the poor, but not very well. So let's not screw around. Let's use the best tools that we have. Claim 6. It can't be done because it's never been done. Yes, it has. In France, in Sweden, in Finland, in Germany. Wealth taxes are still in place in Norway and Switzerland. However, it is true that their implementation has always been a bit crap, for example because of patchy wealth data or poor enforcement. I'm looking at you, France. There's no reason we can't do any better, though, and many studies show exactly how. Next claim. Claim 7. How would you even implement a wealth tax when there's no way to measure wealth properly? We can measure wealth properly. Governments already collect some wealth data on financial assets, for example, to collect taxes on dividends and other capital gains. We just need to extend the system and make it international. Now, getting tax havens on board you might think is difficult, but it isn't. Case in point, Switzerland. The Swiss kept all financial data in their banks confidential for centuries, shared it with nobody. People thought nothing could be done about it, even though confidentiality enabled all sorts of money laundering. That was all until the US threatened Swiss banks with fines in 2009. After that, the Swiss swiftly U-turned and started sharing the financial data with US authorities. So that takes care of financial assets. What's left to measure is real estate and private companies and other real assets. But how do we do this, you ask? Surely, if nothing else, it costs a ton of money to value all real estate in the country. Or what if the taxman values my 2-person carpet cleaning business at 10 billion? Or what if my boss declares his international semiconductor empire to be worth only $10,000? What about my nan's priceless artwork? Now, these are all legit concerns, but let's take a deep breath. The truth is, we've mostly already solved these issues. We estimate the open market value of all sorts of items through their transaction value, through future income, through the cost of replacement. Now, these three methods are used every day in the UK to calculate capital gains taxes and the inheritance tax. Modern databases help as well. In the UK, Rightmove keeps price data for millions of homes across the country. And even artwork is routinely valued. You've got insurance policies and databases of past sales, such as ArtNet. TLDR, wealth measurement is already solved, it just needs putting into practice. Claim 8. A wealth tax is just too expensive to implement and just not worth the hassle. Actually, no. Some guys crunched the numbers and found that it would cost at most 0.1% of all taxable wealth to implement a wealth tax. So that means that if you wanted to tax $500 billion of wealth at the average rate of 0.5% per year, a wealth tax would cost $500 million to implement and at the same time would bring in $2.5 billion. This doesn't seem like a bad deal to me. Claim 9. The people will revolt. Actually, a survey of 17 G20 countries found an overwhelming 68% average support of the wealth tax. And the citizens of every single country were in support of the wealth tax. Even the US citizens were 72% in favour. Checkmate, trickle-downers. But there's more. A recent study in Sweden found that the Swedes became massively in favour of the inheritance tax after being shown information that about 50% of all Swedish wealth is inherited. So that means that with more awareness about the growing gap between the rich and the poor and how wealth taxes can help alleviate this, wealth taxes would be even more popular. Now, after 20 minutes of going on about mostly useless arguments against wealth taxes, we finally get to what I consider to be more legit concerns. Claim 10. How will you pay? This is not an issue for financial assets, shares in large businesses and similar, but it can be a real issue, for example, if you're a single retiree, a small farmer, or a small business owner. In this case, you may not have much income and can only pay by selling your assets, borrowing, or giving part of your assets directly to the taxman in the form of a share or a stake. Now, the best solution to this is just not to tax small fortunes, for example, 1, 2, even 3 million pounds. This still kind of sucks if you're an old lady in a mansion, but what are you going to do? Take it to the underworld with you? Get lodges or downsize, free up some cash, enjoy life, spend winters sunbathing in the Canary Islands or something. Claim 11. If you try to tax their wealth, the rich will just move to the Cayman Islands. Now, there is some truth to this. For example, there is evidence of capital flight from France because of the wealth tax there, but it's not as significant as it's advertised to be. Also, the rich are often not as mobile as you think they are. Sure, they like to travel and have flats in London, Tokyo and New York and all of that, but social networks and hard assets tie them down. They do like spending their evenings in their favourite gentleman's club in London. They are owners of companies and football clubs. They're real estate magnates. They can't take this wealth to the Caymans with them, and this means their wealth can be taxed wherever it is. However, the tax flight concern does apply if the wealth is primarily in financial assets. But in this case, all we need to do is track them. That includes trusts, of course, and exchange information across borders, like I've just discussed. And if somebody does want to move from London to the Cayman Islands, all that needs doing is applying an exit tax. Or alternatively, in the long run, pressure all the tax havens to increase tax rates, just like the US pressured Switzerland in 2009. Boom. Problem solved. To recap, we've had a close look at a bunch of arguments against wealth taxes. some border on comical, but most are just overblown. Where there are actual difficulties in implementation, for example, taxing farmers or capital flight, workable solutions exist for all of these. For example, we can only tax large fortunes and start tracking and sharing information on financial assets. We can pressure tax havens to shut down. Also, taxing wealth is wildly popular. It's got 68% average support in 17 G20 countries. For reference, that's higher than the support for weed legalization in the US in recent years. The biggest obstacle to implementing wealth taxes is that there's currently no political will for serious change. So pull out your phones, pull out your keyboards, talk to your friends, talk to your nan, start badgering your political representatives, and help push for wealth taxes. Don't let your kids down. And if you like this production, subscribe and tune in for more in the future.